Finance Committee meeting, joint budget meeting to order for the Select Board for Saturday, March 2nd, 2024. One other thing I'd like to do is recognize a young gentleman in the back who's was a Boy Scout. Not you, John. Who's here on a Saturday earning his community service badge. So I think we should all give him some applause. And if the young man would just like to come up and introduce himself, we'd love to hear who you are.
No pressure.
You can come up here to the microphone. It's pretty impressive you're here on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, microphone right there.
Right there, you can, yeah.
Yeah, just sit
You
at
can
the
just
chair,
sit there
you'll be
and then-
good.
Yeah. Just tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm doing my communication merit badge for my Eagle. It's last one, got 2 more after this, and then I'm going to be an Eagle Scout. So
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And what's your name?
I'm Hugo Wooten.
Wow, thank you, Hugo, for coming. I mean, it's kids like you that make us have hope for the future, so thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just taking questions.
So I've moved to open the hearing, and now I'll hand it over to Peter Hughes. Peter, do you want to open your?
Yes, we are posted, and I'll call the Finance Committee meeting to order.
Great, thank
We're
you.
good.
And then I'm going to hand it to Doe for an overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of Finance Committee, and everyone assembled here today. Thank you for being here on one of our greatest days ahead of town meeting, our annual budget workshop. I am Joe Powers, Town Administrator. Joining me is Megan Eldridge, Assistant Town Administrator, and Kathleen Barrett, our Finance Director. Very quickly, the process that we're doing today is not required by the charter. However, it follows on required actions of the charter and leads into other required actions. Mr. Chairman, if I may, we spoke a moment before.
Yep.
So one of those required actions going forward is that the Finance Committee, who have now formally been transmitted the budget by the documents that were presented earlier this week by vote of the Select Board, the Finance Committee by charter is now required to have a public hearing. The chairman has indicated that the public hearing for the fiscal year 2025 operating budget and any other topics that the Finance Committee so desires will take place Thursday evening, March 21st, at what time, Mr. Chairman?
6 p.m.
At 6 p.m. Do you believe that will be here?
I believe it will be next door.
Very good. All right, thank you. So the public hearing, as required by the charter, will be Thursday, March 21st, 6 p.m. here at Town Hall. And then lastly, this builds off of a budget and a budget message that I'm required to develop under the charter. I presented that to the Select Board on February 5th, ahead of the required deadline, and again, the board presented it to, voted to present it and send it to the Finance Committee in draft form as required by the charter. So the hope and expectation today is that the members of the Select Board and Finance Committee will be able to hear directly from department heads who are department and project owners on their budget request for fiscal year 2025. As I said in my budget message back on February 5th, I still urge that we take deliberate action and caution in these days with some uncertainties of certain numbers. However, that is a big part of what the discussion will be today. And lastly, as I say every year, and I've been taught a million years ago, for me in municipal government, an operating budget is meant to declare the priorities of the community. And so I think that's what we will end up with for Monday, May 6th, is an operating budget that hews with the priorities and objectives of the town of Harwich. With that, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Joe. So the first item on the agenda is the sources and uses, and I'm going to look to board members if you have any specific questions. On Michael?
Sure. The only question I have is overlay surplus, and that's been a question that I've asked a few times. Are we getting closer to getting a vote from the assessors on whether or not we're going to have overlay surplus to use?
And so I'm going to look to finance.
It's on. It is my understanding that the Board of Assessors have a meeting scheduled for March 29th. I do not know what the intention of the meeting is, but I believe overlay surplus is being discussed.
Thank you, Kathleen. Any other questions, Michael?
Just a follow-up on that, if we could ask assessors if that is the case, and if they have any projections at all. Obviously, as we build through this budget and finance committee dives into it, would be great to know if we're gonna have $300,000 or $400,000 extra, not to play with, but to have.
Yeah, the Director of Assessing will be here this afternoon, and I think that she could probably provide a little bit more context.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeff, do you have any specific
Nothing
questions? Don, do you have any questions on
Not
sources?
at the moment.
Peter, I'll go to you.
Okay, I just make the observation that, and I think when you folks discussed this previously, it was brought out as well. But this shows increase in estimated revenues of about 3.5%, and the expenses going up by 4.4. Obviously, those lines start to converge at some point in time. I just think we need to pay attention to that as we go forward. But aside from that, it looks fine to me, and I'll ask if any of my colleagues have any questions or comments.
Just one question, maybe Kathleen can answer it, and I apologize, I think she did answer it at a selectmen's meeting. What is the interfund, interfund transfers? It's up 49%, I just don't understand that. If anybody could explain that.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. The inter-fund transfers are transfers from special revenue funds into the general fund budget to help offset costs. For example, there's the betterments receipts that are transferred in to help offset the betterment debt. There's also transfer in from the PEG fund, which is the, I always forget the P, it's like Public Education and Government Fund, which is through a revenue payment from cable, the cable provider per their agreement. The Gulf Revolving Fund also transfers in for their portion of the debt payment as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
If I could add on that, I think a big part of the reason why it jumped so much is we are also contemplating use of funds available through special purpose stabilization funds. It would require a second article, or excuse me, a separate article. But those funds have not been used prior. They may be used in this, and that's what reflects in that overall number, plus the increase year over year.
Anybody else have any questions on the Finance Committee? I guess my only other comment is just a detail, and that is you have a place where you have an asterisk, not a double asterisk, but no mention of what that indicates. So for instance, at the very bottom under wastewater enterprise fund subsidy, this is double asterisk, and where does that lead me to? I'm just asking the question.
Oh, certainly. Those are kind of some of the notations as we were working through the file. Those numbers are fluid, so I wouldn't feel like it was appropriate, when we initially started this, to actually put the detail. We're still working those out. But it is, the wastewater subsidy is based on the retained earnings in the wastewater enterprise fund, which will help offset their FY25 budget, the salaries, expenses.
Yeah, no, my point is even simple, and that is, what's a double asterisk mean? Why is it there? Do we need it?
It was.
Is that a note for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
But
fine.
note to both of
That's
us.
all you need to say, it's okay. Doesn't affect the numbers, thank you,
No, it does not.
thank you.
Thank you, Peter. If nobody has any other questions on sources and uses, I think we can move on to water, wastewater. So, Barry, Dan, try to spare the rest of your Saturday.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. With me today, Commissioner Goff, Commissioner Thompson, and Commissioner Donahue, and also Superintendent Pelletier, and myself. I don't know if you want to start with water, wastewater.
So I think I'll first start to see if anyone has any specific questions, and then let you talk to the rest of it. So any board members have any specific questions on water, wastewater information? Munis report, none. Okay. Peter?
Okay, on our side, do we have any questions or comments on the water Or wastewater budget, let's just put it that way. I think we're good.
Okay, so why don't we let you go over the items?
You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
So just, sorry. So I'll start with wastewater first. Since our last meeting, and we went over the budget, a few numbers have changed with the budget that we're not sure where they came from or what they mean. So one question is the proposed general fund subsidy for, we have $465,485,000, and it looks as of $150,000 will be coming out of the wastewater retained earnings to go into the subsidy fund. And if that does happen, then that's gonna leave us with about $30,000 in that line item. So if something comes up in the year, we're gonna be coming back to you for funds. So do we really need to move that $150,000 out of our budget? Or can that be brought from the general fund?
Kathleen?
The $150,000, that, just to clarify, is, there is, wastewater enterprise fund has retained earnings currently. Due to some, budgeting issues from prior years, it's a little bit higher than would normally be, because the revenue for wastewater enterprise fund is so low. It does not offset the costs. The expenses, obviously are being paid by the general fund. So if there was retained earnings that were available, it would make sense to transfer them to, to help offset the costs of the wastewater enterprise fund to the general fund. I don't know if there's a policy in place insofar as a specific percentage of retained earnings that would remain in it. The only way that you would be able to access them if something did come up would be at town meeting. So it's not like an easily accessible source of funds. I certainly defer to other parties. I don't make the policy. If I haven't seen a policy, seemed like a reasonable assumption based on, like, the revenue expectation was 25,000. So to leave 30 in there was even more than the revenue would normally go towards it. So that was the mindset. I certainly defer to other parties who make those decisions.
So, all right, well, thank you for that explanation. It's our board's position for our budgets that we typically do 10% for water and 25% for wastewater. So I'm not sure if other members might have questions, because again, we just saw this number Tuesday, so.
That number is, it's been there since we started in early February.
I'm saying we just got it. I just got this Tuesday, I saw this Tuesday.
Okay. There also is no indirect costs being transferred from wastewater to the general fund, because it's giving general fund money to wastewater to then pay it back.
So that was my next question.
Yeah, we
Okay.
just eliminated it because you can't pay indirect funds if you don't have any money to pay it with. It doesn't make sense.
So and I understand that, but if we don't show that as an exercise at least, when we go forward, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, because this isn't my full-time
Yeah, no,
job.
go ahead.
If we don't do this exercise and mark it down that we're moving funds or whatever those funds are, 4 to 5 years down the road, we go back and we're trying to budget, we're not gonna see that number. Is that fair to say, or am I wrong on that?
It's really, the wastewater enterprise fund, as it is in general, really isn't exactly a true enterprise fund because it is not self-supporting. So it's more just segregating, revenue and expenses in a different fund in Munis. It gives you that, but it's not really working. So you really don't have to look back in past practice and say, well, we transferred this much in 2024, because we can just calculate it another way. It's not really going to be relevant to the process. It just looks actually like it's more confusing, just because you're like, we transfer money to it so they could give it back.
No, believe me.
So it gets it's almost easier to just
Yeah, I get that.
omit.
And again, this is just my opinion. I mean, again, this is what I'm just looking at for the last couple of days.
So can I follow up on your question? If I'm hearing you correctly, really, it's a case of, wanting to be able to document how the money moved,
I
where it
just
went,
think- yeah.
and that's the way it's been done in the past.
Right.
So the fear is that suddenly it changes and there's no tracking. right?
I think too, when we move forward and we get out of our infancy phase of wastewater, the goal is to become self-sustaining, right? To be able to balance our revenue and expenses. And I think this is ultimately an expense that in the future we are going to need to account for with, setting rates and determining revenue. So I think from that perspective, to be able to understand what those costs are as we move forward could benefit the rate setting and revenue estimate process.
So on that note, is there any harm in going back to the way we were doing it to their point?
It's not a harm per se, it just raised concerns at DOR. They didn't understand why that was happening, because there was no funding source for it.
So
Go
the
ahead, Gary.
Department of Revenue had a concern with it going that way. So if they're fine with it,
Yeah.
if they're fine with it, then I guess they outrank me, but I just thought it would be confusing not to see it, but.
Maybe you can document it internally so that you all have that information, and then you can, if there's ever a question.
All right.
Oh, Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In support of what Gary's saying, I really don't want to see anything where it just winds up becoming a wash, because we have, over the last several years, demonstrably forgotten a bunch of things. If you're not showing a process and the people start changing around it, nobody remembers anything anymore. And then they start memorializing it like, well, in recent history, it hasn't happened. There really should be a book entry going both ways, even if it's a negative, until it becomes more solid. I mean, so you can see what's going on.
Right, that's why I asked that question, but if DOR is asking that
Did
question.
DOR actually say, don't do it that way?
No, we talked to them about it, and I also talked to the consulting firm that we work with, and it caused more, it was a little more confusion when we were actually putting together the tax rate recap, because the funds were going back and forth, and it was originally, it was difficult to follow. I understand the memorializing part. We certainly can make notation of it, but to create accounting entries that we then submit to the state so that we don't forget to do something that we wouldn't forget to do, I think would be probably a little bit of extra work. I certainly will record whatever you feel. I just would address I would just advise all the parties involved to review it. That was the decision.
Again, it was a real simple question with a yes or a no. Did DOR tell you it had to be this way?
DOR did not tell me exactly it had to be that way. We work in a collaborative way in which we try to find the best process for them to review and for us to process.
Thank you. If the board is looking for a potential solution, so to speak, I think we could accomplish this in the article explanation. That way, it's encoded in the warrant. Any future certifications by the town clerk, I believe they typically, they being town clerks, not being multiple people, they would include explanations. So we could cover it that way unless the board wanted to go in a different direction.
I will point out to you, our legal counsel has in the past said that the explanations are not part of the article or part of the motion.
I would agree with that. It is part of the overall record, however.
Board members have any specific feeling on how they'd like to move forward? Michael?
I would defer to the water commissioners, wastewater, and how they want to do it. It sounds like there's a little bit of gray area here. We can do it either way. It is their budget. I think it falls on them. So if they make the recommendation to do it the way they've done it, then I would support that.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, if there was no specific directive from a higher power, I would support exactly what you're looking to do, and have been doing, from what I understand.
It's just, the project. So just to follow up that, and thank you. So I guess my next question is, for the $150,000, are we all comfortable taking that money out of that line item into the subsidy and leaving us with $30,000 for the year? Or
Sure, go ahead.
should we hold on to that?
Well, the question I have is, you mentioned your best practice and previous practice was 25% and 10%.
25 and 25. The
I'm
10 is
sorry.
the revenue
I'm sorry,
surplus.
25, 25.
Okay, so what would that leave you? 25 and 25? Is that 150,000?
159,000 would be 25% our operating expenses, which is the policy that we've typically operated under with the Water Enterprise Fund. So we typically maintain a minimum fund balance of $1 million. So the first $1 million you see in there, consider it non-existent.
right.
And then up and above that, we tap into it.
Thank you for that. Sorry, Gary.
Sorry, just to give that a little relevance, what are we replacing in the wastewater?
The backup flow control panels
So those
this
are
year,
two?
that was the $20,000.
So that was $20,000 right there that we have to spend to do the thingamajiggy he just said there.
Write that down.
The thingamajiggy.
Well, I guess, to Gary's point, you know, now that we're up and we're operating, we are seeing things that we need to do. One of them being a backup flow control at some of these pump stations. We did experience a backup on Bay Road, you know, so that I had to send a camera down the sewer main to do some investigatory work. So there are definitely some expenses and things that come up that, you know, absent any money in our retained earnings to use for those purposes, we would be coming back to you in the general fund to offset those costs. So it's really, we can keep some money aside and try to use that and limit our interaction with the general fund, or we can say, let's dump it into the budget and just understand that as things come up, we'll be coming to you folks for support.
So
To my back,
my
sorry.
follow-up on that item then is, what would you be comfortable with in that fund?
Well, again, the board, and again, you haven't seen this yet, so if you have anything else you want to add, but as general practice, I'd feel better having the 159 in there
Okay.
and just leaving it the way we had it, and then subsidize that out of the general fund, unfortunately.
Okay.
I mean, next year on the wastewater capital plan, we do have a vehicle proposed for the assistant wastewater superintendent. We have a $65,000 placeholder. You know, if we do move forward with moving the 150 in, that leaves 30,000 then to support that vehicle acquisition. So we would be seeking general fund support for the other half if we do move forward, so.
I'll hand it to Peter.
I guess my comment on this is water, wastewater is gonna evolve over time, and we're all learning by doing as we go forward, and I think the most important thing is we document those decisions and make sure we learn from that as we go forward. So that's that one. On the water side of it, I would just ask when we get all done with this, with the budget that's proposed, what's the potential impact on water rates, if anything?
You want me to delve into that now?
That's my
Did we-
question.
Did you settle the retained earnings question, or is that tabled?
Again, my motion would be to retain the 159,571 in our budget in the event of, you know, issues coming up down the road. I mean, that'd be my, again, we haven't voted on this yet. This is the first time,
Right,
so.
so we can discuss it and
Yeah.
then bring it up again. I mean, we don't, Joe?
If I may, before we go down the
Yeah.
water revenue, which is a keenly interesting topic for sure, just for the benefit of everybody here, plus anyone that may be accessing the material separately, in our budget books, we have the munis reports. Can you just direct us to the munis report and the specific line items that this would impact upon? So I think, Dan, for our purposes, we had reports that were provided by Sandy, and I think we have additional reports from accounting.
So, which number the 150 impacts upon?
Correct, yeah. I just want to make sure we can identify it in the existing material.
Well, so our total budget is it's a revenue source for the total budget. So if we don't move the 150 in, we'll be at a deficit of 150. So it's really the bottom line number is
So,
revenue.
If I may, specifically bottom line, we're talking about the report generated, the footer in the lower left-hand corner, 228. Do you see that?
Yeah,
Yep, so the 228 report, it says page 1 in the right-hand footer. Headlines are wastewater enterprise, and then towards the bottom, we see total wastewater revenue to wastewater enterprise, and then below that, total revenue, total expense.
yeah.
Where would you draw us to on that?
The 638.
All right, thank you. So then, for the record, 638 appears in the total expense line just above the grand total in the column that reads projection level 3, $638,284. And then because of that, it shows a year-over-year percentage decrease of 43.8%. That's the area we're talking about?
Yeah.
And so then, for the discussion, the preference until it can become a directive would be to add 159,571?
159,571, yes. Or,
No.
Sorry, yep, that's why I asked the
Yeah,
question. Go ahead.
so the 159 would be what remains in the enterprise fund after
After that.
the subsidy.
All right, and then to the phraseology of subsidy, do we see that in this report?
So in essence, the biggest impact it would have on the documents today would be back in the sources and uses, and that 467 would
On the
increase
sources
to the
and uses,
150.
okay. And the reason I ask is I would imagine, as the primary author of the warrant, as you know, we have a separate article for the water department budget, we have a separate article for the wastewater department budget, and to these comments, we usually have a table in there, or at least something that articulates this. So, trying to lead the witness, it may be true that in that article, and as the other member had said, not necessarily in the body of the article nor in the motion, but still articulated in our warrant, a table and an explanation that describe that. Does that sound fairly sufficient?
Yes.
And as Dan's doing that, the purpose for that is, I think as we all know, all of this discussion on worksheets and documents and all that really then materializes as articles in the warrant with associated appendices. Does that work? Does it make sense, first of all, and then would that work?
I think so, yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead, Alan.
Yep.
It doesn't work, because we don't know where we're at. So if we're gonna make changes, let's understand what we're doing, and don't leave us hanging out there in the middle of the year next year and having problems. So we need to get this down pat of what's happening. Now, if we have to come back, we come back.
Mhm.
But at this point, we don't have all the answers today or tomorrow, or even next year. This is an ongoing project that we've been through in other areas in the past. Now, if this works, don't mess it up. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Alan.
So Julie, maybe the task is that, based on this discussion, you folks come back with a marked up version of what
Right,
you're
well,
proposing to do?
yeah, so I'm just gonna go to Noreen first, and then we can go
Yeah.
back to how we're gonna move forward. Noreen?
Thank you. I just wanted to go up another 10,000 feet. You know, we within our board and department had talked over the years of hoping to eventually have the wastewater department be self-sufficient. I don't mean paying for the debt for the construction, I mean just our department. So let's say we're running around 500,000-600,000, that's what we've been running in expenses for the past couple of years. So one of the things that we've tossed around, and I got a feeling we're both going for it, is the money that will be in the wastewater special purpose stabilization fund, which is probably gonna come in ballpark at about $400,000 a year. So when you think about it, I mean, but also on the town side, Joe's probably got that slotted for construction as well. So we need a discussion about which special purpose funds are paying for what, for one thing. Because our hope, or certainly I've heard Dan voice very intelligently, that within a couple of years, despite our speed with connecting people, wastewater would be able to support itself between accumulating some retained earnings like that 159 combining it with the special purpose, maybe even, maybe the WIF goes to construction, maybe the special purpose stays with us. But I just wanted you to see that there was a broader goal under discussion for direction, and obviously, we need to all communicate
Right.
that back and forth to each other.
And I think exactly that you've just nailed on the head, to me anyway, is that what we've been doing has been working. If there's not a reason that we have to change it in terms of documenting things and how we are projecting, I don't see a need to change that. So, but to that point, we can have this discussion and nail down with, better materials, and you can come back to us and we can talk about it, and then you can present it at your hearing. But I think we all just want to exactly do that, is document what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then I think it's been working. So, I'm open to further discussion, but I think if you give us some more materials, we can talk about it and
Absolutely.
finalize it. Doesn't sound like it's something that DOR won't allow us to do, so let's just figure out the best way to do it.
Could we make some kind of commitment to get this done within a week or 10 days
Yeah,
or
we,
something?
well, we would
'Cause-
have to, because Monday is what, the 6th? So
Yeah.
we'd need to have it at our 13th meeting, March 13th, so. So we'll just make note of,
Yep,
oh, is it the 11th?
yeah.
What's today?
Today's the 2nd.
Oh, I'm thinking the 4th is Monday, so it's the 11th, yes.
Past few years in the budget, the superintendent and I have worked on the standalone articles. We'll continue to do that in this case, and we'll try to articulate all the information that ties with everything everyone's looking for.
Thank you.
Knowing that in the end, much of this has to go to the Division of Local Services under the Department of Revenue for oversight. So,
Right, okay. Do you want to delve into another area, or do you want to go back
Should
to
I-
questions? Oh,
Question first, I just want to try and close the loop on this,
Yep.
for, back to sources and uses. It sounds like at the moment, we're roughly adding $130-ish thousand to the 467 at the bottom of the sources and uses.
150,000.
I'm not trying to get the exact number, but.
About 150, she said.
No, but that's
150,000.
That's why I don't want to go through this again. They've got a balance. They want to get to 159.
Right.
That sounded like adding more or less from, I think you said you were around 30 before, 130 more or less.
That would leave them with 30.
No, the 150, adding 130 to the 30 would get them to the 159, it sounds like, which in fact would then add 130 to the subsidy of 467 and get us up to roughly $600,000, roughly. I just, because I'm trying to look at the bottom line on the sources and uses. Okay. Does that sound like where
And,
we are?
yeah, and exactly what you just described is what we want to document, right? So we want to make sure that we all understand the numbers and that we're all comfortable with the way we're doing it.
And the
So-
effect on the budget?
Right.
Fair enough.
You good with
Can I
that?
jump into the rate, Peter's question
Yeah.
on water rates?
Sure.
Are we done with wastewater? With wastewater?
Does anyone else have any follow-up questions on our board for wastewater?
You guys, you have a question on wastewater? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I know you've worked on this, Mr. Chairman. Is there a debt schedule for all the upcoming debt we have incurring for wastewater?
Yes.
There is, okay.
My answer would be that's not the burden of the water wastewater commissioners or the superintendent, that's the burden of finance and administration. However, Dan nailed it, the answer is yes. And I can work through our finance director and our financial advisor, Hilltop Advisors, to make sure we have that data.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so do you want to move on to?
Yeah, so to Peter's question on FY '25 budget and revenue to support it, so we are actually actively engaged in those discussions right now. The most recent or up-to-date information is we had got the updated debt schedules from Hilltop, which included our Route 28 sewer, water main replacement project, as well as some debt for the Pleasant Lake tank project that we would be moving forward with next year. At the latest Water Commission meeting, they had discussed funding the tank project out of our retained earnings and not bonding that. So it looks like by moving that to retained earnings, that we will not need to do a rate increase for '25, but we will certainly for '26 and the out years as the debt for those capital project continues
Okay.
to pick up. I don't want to make a promise because we're still working through it, but that's what it's looking like right now.
So if someone wants to reduce their water bill for next year, they should reduce their consumption.
Absolutely.
We have some expensive projects coming up.
Anybody else have questions on the finance committee? About this topic? Okay, we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from our board on water rates?
If I may, before you dismiss the witnesses, so to speak, the superintendent and I, working through both the Board of Water Wastewater Commissioners and the Select Board, just a reminder for everybody that our community forum on the Phase 3 construction projects is scheduled for Thursday, March 7th at 7 PM at the Community Center. We're going to be in the multipurpose room, and we're also going to have a Teams link, so if you can't make it in person, you will have an opportunity to participate remotely, and we will be, I don't know what the word is anymore, filming perhaps, but recording for future purpose. It's not expected to be broadcast live, but our community forum on the Phase 3 construction projects Thursday, March 7th, 7 PM with the superintendent, myself, and Jeff Gregg from GHDR Engineering Firm.
Thank you, Joe.
Dan, interrupts.
I love Noreen. She keeps me on my toes. Before we do go, I just want to touch base real quick. Seeing that we are coming back with wastewater budget, we will be coming back with water as well, because there are some indirect numbers that have changed since our previous meeting that we haven't had the opportunity to discuss or dive into where those percentages and numbers came from. The other thing we have on the table too is we do have an outside company coming in to do an indirect study with us. So we have, our goal is, because every time we finance directors change, our indirects change dramatically. And it's very tough to budget when things change that dramatically. So what we'd like to do is have a survey come in, do the study, and then meet with you all to give you the results and maybe come to some kind of agreement, so when we go forward and down the road, we know what to expect for our indirect charges.
When are you having that?
We
study?
haven't set that up.
I had initially reached out to him. He's putting a proposal together now. It wouldn't be for this fiscal year. He said likely this summer.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question? So they're gonna analyze how much the town's departments,
Yes, that's his plan.
what they do for your department
Exactly.
that you're hiring? Okay.
It's been done before from the town. The town hired a consultant and did the same
I
thing
mean, we
4 or
had
5 years ago.
Back and forth, Dan and myself, for quite a while when we created this originally. I didn't realize it changed. No, that'd be interesting to,
Well, it wasn't really Dan's thought, it was the board's thought, to have an understanding of what our indirects are. I mean, just property and value, vehicle insurance went up to 15% this year for FY '25. I mean.
yeah, and that was
that's
in
just one-
anticipation of the hundreds of thousands of vehicles that you're
I think
purchasing.
it's a process for our board to understand the indirects and
Certainly.
to have an opinion again, before we would do anything. I mean, obviously, we would have a joint meeting with the board just to see where we're at and where we're moving forward, because it changes dramatically.
We may end up paying more
Right, yeah,
in indirects. You know, I think,
That'd be helpful.
yeah, good to have an analysis.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Noreen,
Did you have,
anybody else have anything they want to add? Oh,
no?
Noreen's got nothing to say, all
Any
right.
other questions?
Looks good. I think we're good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great, thanks, guys.
Make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Is there a second? Second, all in favor? Aye.
They don't want to
Thank you all for, they just want to hang out here with you
They don't
all
want to
day.
go home.
Thank you very much for your time,
Thank you
really
very
appreciate it.
much.
We'll call them back at the end of the day, I think.
Thank you all. Nice to see you.
You too. Take care, Alan.
So, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, first of the departmental operating budgets, which, as you know, will come up under Article 4, if that is the continuation of numbering in our warrant. Next up would be our police department, and I know this morning we're joined by Chief Gilmet and Deputy Chief Considine. And let me be the first one to try to embarrass our chief. As you all know, or should know, this is Chief Gilmet's final budget process. He has opted to retire soon after the fiscal year, so I would defer to everybody else, but I would like to give him a round of applause if we could. And then, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, turn it back over to you.
Thank you, John. Good morning.
Morning.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
That's good.
I'll tell you in about 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah. For a Saturday morning, you're doing pretty good. Thanks for coming this morning. I'm going to, again, go to any specific questions and then go back to you for general.
I wonder, Madam
Oh, yeah,
Chair, if
go
I
ahead.
could just, I had planned to do a little lead-in.
Sure, go ahead.
If that's, sure.
Yep.
Okay, so, as I like to do every year, I really want to thank everybody for being here on a Saturday, giving up their Saturday, and working through this process with us, giving us an opportunity to present our budget and to answer some questions for you. So, a big thank you to the FinCom and to the members of the Select Board and to Joe and Megan and Kathleen for their support and that you've all provided the police department, throughout this process. So my plan this morning would be to give you a quick snapshot of what the status of the police department is right now as we sit here, and then how that status has impacted our budget request, and then also maybe identify some priorities that drove our budget requests. So by way of lead-in, I think it's extremely important to mention, and because it really impacts everything that we have done on this budget, that we are in the midst, Harwich PD is in the midst of an unprecedented staffing crisis. Let me just give you what our numbers at full staffing are. We have 4 command staff, so we have an authorized strength of 35 officers, 35, okay? That includes 4 command staff. That's me, that's deputy chief, that's 2 lieutenants. 5 sergeants, 4 of them are what we call line sergeant. When I say line, I mean in uniform out there in the cars, either supervising or patrolling, okay? So we have 5 sergeants. 1 is a detective sergeant. He runs the detective division, which is plainclothes, not line, right? You have 2 detectives, 2 SROs, stands for school resource officers, and 22 patrol officers, okay? As we sit here today, we are down 12 positions. Let me say that again. 12 positions out of 35 officer department, which includes me, okay? Now, don't get confused that those are not vacancies. Those are positions. So if we look at the numbers, you met them, I was out of the country, but you met them the other night, right? We just put 4 in the academy.
Right.
We just graduated 2 from the academy, okay? So with those 6 officers, those 4 are not gonna be out of the academy until mid-August, and they're not gonna be out of field training until October. The basic rule of thumb is when you hire an officer, it takes a year to get them on the street, impacting the schedule, filling a vacancy. So there's 4 coming out in mid-August and going into field training. They won't impact the schedule till October. The 2 officers who are in field training now are gonna be out in June. So that's a total of 6. There's 1 official vacancy, and that's due to a recent medical retirement, and we have a hiring process underway for that position right now. So that's 7, right? There are 5 officers out on either long-term injured or medical leave, which is either covered under sick or injured on duty. Now, when I say long-term, one of them's coming up on a year, I think, maybe 2 of them coming up on being out a year. 2 of these positions are sergeants. So there's 50% of our line sergeants gone right there. Now, what this means to us is we are bleeding overtime. Like, all these positions have to be covered by overtime. There's no other option. We have done things to mitigate the impact of this kind of shortage, but there's only so much we can do. There's really nobody left on the bench, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, we have one last nuclear option that I won't get into here, but it's drastic. And that's about the only, because if we lose anybody else, so I guess the purpose of this lead-in is the overtime situation is not pretty. Last year, we were $134,000 in the red in overtime. However, we balanced out because we had vacant positions and that salary was available to offset that deficit.
We are not going to be in that situation this fiscal year or next fiscal year, because now all those vacancies are filled, and we are paying the salary plus the overtime to fill those positions, because they're still in training, or they're out long-term sick, so they're being paid either sick time or IOD pay, and we're still paying overtime to fill those positions. So this situation has colored everything we have done in the budget, and we just wanted to put it out there that that's where we're at. If you look at one of the reports that's available in the packet, the next year, current year budget analysis report, which has the actuals for FY '24, you'll see we have about $40,000 left in overtime for this fiscal year. So we're actually looking at probably doubling that 134 figure this fiscal year. And we've already had conversations with the town administrator about that, and we're going to, we have to get a little bit maybe tighter estimates moving forward as to what kind of offset is going to be available, but it's not a pretty picture. So with that being said, we still have a mission, which is to provide policing services to the community, and that's our number one priority. And when I say policing services, that's you pick up the phone and you call for police, and you get a police officer properly trained and equipped to show up to deal with whatever the situation is. And little subsets of that, which we introduced last year into our budget, which we feel are extremely important, is officer wellness issues and training. So we also are focusing as much as we can on increasing the frequency and quality of training while not going crazy, spending overtime, because we know it's all going into that vortex to cover the openings, and then a focus on officer wellness, what we feel is extremely important. So those are the priorities that drove our budget and the situation that we're in. We certainly will do our very best to answer any questions you might have. As you see from the reports, our expenses came in at 1.4. I think that was the request to hold at 1.5, and salaries and wages came in at 3.5. So if you have any specific questions, the deputy is more than willing to answer.
So, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, as the chief had mentioned, in your packets, under the section that reads fiscal year 2025 departmental budgets, you'll find Department 210, Police Department, appears on page 3. As Chief Gilmet has just mentioned, under police for salaries and wages, requested for fiscal year '25 is $4,696,659. It represents an increase of 3.5% year over year, which is essentially contractual obligations for the various collective bargaining agreements that cover the police department. And as Chief just mentioned, an expense line request of $613,275, which represents a 1.4% increase. And then lastly, in the next year budget section of your book, their department information starts on page 12.
So, Madam Chair, if I could,
Sure, go ahead.
on the overtime part and trying to backfill positions, it's one thing to have the money to do it, but are you burning people out? I mean, there's only so much overtime an individual can take. Are you at the point where it's overstressing the individuals who are working there, or are guys like, or, men and women like, okay, I'll take the overtime, I'm glad to do it, it's just costing more money to do it?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That is our major concern at this point, and we are checking in regularly with the operations lieutenant, Lieutenant Hutton, probably on a weekly basis. I ask him that same question, and he says, you know what, we're getting the shifts filled. There's not a whole lot of ordering going on. There is some, and that being ordered into a shift from home after you probably worked through your days off already, is demoralizing. So that is a major concern. However, as I said, we're limited in what we can do. It's just the nature of the beast to get people onto the street to fill those positions.
And do you have the sense, or do you know that other departments in our neighborhood basically are having the same kind of issues?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. To our credit, we've actually been attracting officers from other police departments, and they're not happy about that.
Well, it's a competition out there. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, no, I understand that.
And Peter, we've worked with the union over the last year to revise our overtime ordering policy, which was brought up by them. And the last option is ordering from home, because that is the worst thing that can happen, is get a call at home and say, come on in. So it's ordered from those on the shift, and they're very happy about it, and it's actually helped us immensely.
Okay, and hopefully you were fully informed of this before you elected to become our next chief.
Yes.
Congratulations, by the way.
Saw it coming.
Thank you, Peter. You want to go to your board members?
Last year, we spoke about at the tech school. The reimbursement hasn't changed since the school opened. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but have we got some guidance on, we're 11% of the population at the tech. Whatever the yearly cost is for the resource officer, in essence, Howard should only be paying the 11%. You know, we're not really at that point right now, and in effect, the other town, we're subsidizing what I think should be the other town's expense, but that's my question. Have you got guidance on what the reimbursement level should be? And, you know, have we spoken about it at Cape Cod Tech?
Yeah, so that actually might be above my pay grade, but the answer is no. We haven't received any guidance. I would love to see the salaries of both SROs covered by the school districts that they represent, but I don't think that's ever gonna happen. At least we get something from the tech, but then again, that doesn't go into our budget, that goes into the general fund. So it's not helping us.
I'll just point out that at our meeting next Wednesday, we will have a tech school in, and that'll be a conversation that we're interested in anyhow, so you may want to show up, or one of you may want to show up just to have that discussion for 5 minutes and see where it takes us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody
Any
else?
other-
We're good.
Okay. Any questions from board members? Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is above your pay grade, but I just want to throw one other thing in the mix. It's not just picking up the expense, it's the response time. You got somebody on campus for any kind of an emergency as it sits right now, and it's not analogous to a business, which pays property taxes, everything. They actually bill us for the services they're providing. So, I mean, we're providing an ancillary service to them where there's demonstrably a lower grade of service if you don't have the resource officer there. It's not as if they've never had a problem of, like, bomb threats or fights or anything, and you know that. So that discussion really needs to happen, because Mark's right. I mean, percentage of our students is minuscule compared to the rest of the people who are physically located in Harwich for most of the day.
Right. Understood.
Michael?
I have no questions on the budget, but I do remember the same exact conversation last year, and I think it is time to have a much larger conversation about the solution to this. And I think you've done a good job putting a Band-Aid on it, but it's not gonna get any better. And you are correct, all these other towns are looking, and thankfully, we're able to poach some of them. We need to poach more, but I think long-term, we need to have a plan, because this is not getting any better. It's only gotten worse since last year, so hopefully there's some thought in where we can go from here and some recommendations to come forward. I mean, you can't be down 12 people.
But there, you know, those 5, you know, Kevin and I discussed this. We can absorb 4 or 5. That's usually what we run at. When I first came in as chief, I think we were down a couple. I'm not sure I had a single year full staffed, but we can absorb 4 or 5 and still run fine. It's when you tack 5 more or 6 more on top of that because of injuries and illness, long-term, you know, outages, those are the killers. The vacancies, you know, and the training time. So that there's limited things that we can control in that, you know, sphere. But we certainly are open to it. And we have some ideas, but there's also an issue of, you know, would be crazy for us to come up here and ask for 5 more cops when we're down 12. You know, I think we need to look at the situation when we're closer to full staff and see, you know, where we take it from there. And hopefully that'll be October.
Thank you.
Jeff?
I have nothing, thank you. Thank you, Bill.
No, and I appreciate the overview because, to your point, a lot of this gets lost on us in the day-to-day and what you're dealing with, which matters to you on a day-to-day basis. And not to put you on the spot, but do you have any idea in terms of those, some on the shorter-term medical, when they'll be back, or?
Yeah, I think we got some good news from one of the sergeants. Instead of surgery, ACL surgery, I think it's looking like PT in maybe 6 weeks.
Oh,
And
good.
it would have been months. 2 other officers have already had surgery.
Mhm.
One's in the queue.
The other long-term ones are probably matching up with the academy that's in now, getting out of FTO, which would be October, which, as the chief mentioned, this just brings us into that next fiscal year.
Right, right, and that discussion, right.
So we tried to plan accordingly, but
And of note, I just want to make it clear that we're very fortunate in our budget to have a lot of community policing overtime monies to handle a lot of community policing activities. For example, Citizen Police Academy, summer events. We've used all that just with covering shifts.
Right.
So it's unfortunate, but we are taking efforts to do as much as we can to try to absorb that cost.
Well, I don't have any other questions. I do a great job, and I get the predicament. It's not an easy one. Joe, did you have any?
Just if they're closing out, we thanked Chief Gilmet on the way into the budget discussion and congratulated him. And of course, for the record, we should thank and congratulate our incoming police chief, current deputy police chief, Kevin Considine, and I think that's also worthy of a round of applause.
As
So,
do I.
Thank you.
And Julie mentioned last year, because I forgot, the plunge is the 16th. We'd love to see everybody,
thank God, I'll
not to
be
jump
away.
in, but just to support us.
thank you.
Kevin, I'll
Thank
be
you.
in
Thank you, be
Florida.
Thank
safe
you
out
very
there.
much.
Florida,
Videotape.
if necessary. Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, next up on the agenda would be Department 220, which is the Fire Department. We have with us this morning Fire Chief Dave LeBlanc and Deputy Fire Chief Craig Thornton. And following along in the materials, in the fiscal year 2025 departmental budget section, Department 210 also appears, 220 appears on page 3. In the next year budget comparison, it's page 9. And in the next year comparison for budget analysis, it's page 14.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. I turn it back over to you folks.
Morning.
Good morning. Happy
Again, thanks for
Saturday.
joining us Saturday morning, so.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate the opportunity, as always.
So I guess I'll, again, go back to board members, if anyone, unless you want to do an overview first.
No, I'm
Okay.
comfortable with that.
If any board members of the select board have any specific questions. Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess what the question I'm going to ask is in the spirit of, and it's not really how you submitted this. This isn't an accounting endeavor. None of this is. I mean, this is supposed to be revelatory to both the boards that are sitting here and the public when they are voting on a budget to figure out, okay, how are you doing what you're doing, and what do you need to do, what do you need to have to do that? On the enhancement of services, this is $274,000. Is that up above and beyond the level of staffing and activity that you were providing this year? Or is that accounting for operations last year that didn't fall within the guidelines of the percentages that were presented to you?
So the EOS that was submitted to you all for FY '25 is to increase our staffing from 7-person minimum to an 8-person minimum. We were very fortunate by all of you guys agreeing to hiring 4 firefighters last year, but in that agreement was to reduce the overtime by just over 200,000. So we're back. We're back with trying to get that number for minimum staffing when we start the day to 8. So that number would allow us to cover the required shifts year-round, and that would allow us to have not ever leave one of the firefighters alone by themselves. It would allow us to have more personnel on duty to respond to emergencies, be more effective. So that number represents going from a 7-person minimum to an 8-person minimum. Our current shift is 9, thankful to the taxpayers and you all for supporting that last year. But when we put it to 9, we kept our minimum at 7. So that allowed us to not have to hire anybody until we actually went through almost 3 people. 2 people could be off on vacation, sick, training, leave, whatever, contractual leave or other leave, and then we wouldn't have to backfill their position. This represents the number that will allow us to do 8-person shift next year, 365 days.
Okay, that was really why I brought it up. That's a discussion that's worth having, but when you just have a summary line item that just says salaries and it doesn't bust out to show you what's happening below that, there's no way for anybody to know that that's the discussion.
And this is, since I've been in the department, this has been, I don't want to say a battle, but the balance that we've always done in the town is overtime versus staffing. And we get to a point where the overtime gets too high, and then we hire some people that knocks the overtime back down, and we try and do this. We've really identified now, and there's a couple of factors, we've talked about them in the past. Housing, if people can't afford to buy a house in Harwich, they're not really useful to us as when they're off duty. And that model, that off-duty response of people coming back is changing. People have families, their wives work, they're interested in working their shifts, and we're not experiencing that yet, but everybody around us is. So we would be foolish to say, well, that's a Chatham problem or a Brewster problem. It's going to be a Harwich problem. It just isn't right now. We certainly have seen some change. There's still some really heavy hitters that will come in for overtime because that's the department they grew up in. That's what they were call firefighters and they've worked their way through. They're going to retire, and when they retire, we're going to see a drop in what gets covered. And as a fire chief, one of the things that keeps me up at night, a lot of things keep me up at night, but is one person being by themselves at the headquarters station, either waiting for somebody else to come in, or because nobody did come in, and that next call coming in. Somebody having chest pain, somebody having, somebody getting in a car accident, or somebody's house catching fire. And that one person is going to be put in a position where they either have to act unsafely or wait until they have enough resources to do something. And that's what we're trying to at least mitigate a little bit of.
And realistically, so we all understand this, what does that circle around the geography mean? Because essentially what you're saying is not everybody lives in Harwich anymore.
Right. 6
So
miles
what's-
from either station is what is available for callback. So they have to live within that. We're fortunate that pretty much everybody does right now. We have 1 or 2 flyers that live outside of it. But it's 6 miles outside, as a crow flies from either station.
Thanks.
Michael?
Are you at full strength?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
That was my question. Where do we stand today?
We have one long-term sick vacancy that we expect back, in 8 weeks. If you look at our budget, if you look at our overtime every year, we budget for 1 person to be out for the entire year, line of duty. Like the police are now, we've had years where we've had a whole shift that's been out line of duty at one time. So it's, with the nature of the job, that's something we have to, plan for. But we're fortunate, knock on wood, that it's not an issue.
In terms of,
No,
you're good.
I'm good. Thank you.
In terms of recruits, et cetera, are you struggling the same way that?
We were very fortunate to attract some great people.
We are not well-liked in our community right now.
Yeah, the 4 hires that was supported here last year, we were able to, they wanted to work here from other communities.
Great.
We were very lucky.
So we took 4 fully
Four.
trained, some seasoned 4 or 5 year people here.
The fire department has a great reputation, and it continues, and we're very lucky.
That's
very
great.
Fortunate.
It's good news. We need a little good news.
You're right.
I don't have any other questions. I'll give it to Peter.
So I'll just make a comment that I think for at least 15, maybe 20 years now, on and off between sitting over here, we come to this table and between police and fire, and I'm quite frankly also with schools, we hear the same comment, and that is that people can't afford to buy a house to be here so that they can be part of our team, okay? I think it's getting to be time where we need to start thinking, do we have to come up with a creative solution? So if some young person is coming out, wants to make the fire service, for instance, their career, that we somehow give them an assist to jumpstart them on getting a house. What does that mean? I don't have the exact details, but it may mean we have to give them $150,000 sign-on that says you can only use that to buy your first house in Harwich as long as you stay with our department. I'm making a number up for 10 years. That money is yours. If you leave during that period of time, we're getting it back or prorating some of it back, something that says we can make a meaningful impact on this, because we're not at the moment. The only other way to do it is you start saying, well, okay, we're gonna add $20,000 or something to everybody's salary so they can get in. I think a lot of times they're just starting their careers and they don't have the funds to go buy a house, to make the down payment and get going. We've heard this forever. So maybe it's time to really start thinking about this. Maybe we need to get together as a group and just have a little workshop to try and figure out how we can solve this problem, because it's not going away. And as you say, the folks that grew up in the community and, their parents are in the fire service or whatever, the police department, they're all starting to come out the other end when it's time to retire. And now you're looking at trying to get somebody from, I'm making this up, somebody from Holbrook to come down here and start their career and, live here on the Cape with the cost of housing. I mean, it's a reality we face. Otherwise, you're gonna be here every year. You're gonna tell us about the overtime. We're gonna have holes. We're gonna be burning people up. And we struggle with the situation, So, it's just my comment.
No, I like the idea. I mean, I think we have to try to be creative and, we're talking about fire, police, schools, and town.
Town employees, I mean,
Right. And
Across
so,
the board.
right. So it's impacting everybody and everything. And then, of course, the retirements in all of those fields are going to be increasing even worse in the next couple of years. So,
And this budget reflects three. We have three budgeted retirements, and that's gonna be, if they all retire, it's 2 captains and a fire inspector. It's gonna be a pretty significant impact on the department.
yeah.
In terms of age and experience, and guys that are dedicated. I mean, anybody that knows Bruce Young knows that if he's not working, he's working. And,
Yep.
that's gonna be a hole. Donnie Parker, same way. Joey Mayo, the three of them. So we're looking at that change coming up, and the department is, we've kind of turned that corner where there was a while there where more than half the department had less than 5 years on. And that's changed a little bit, but that was a big experience gap that we lost, and that's why, this budget reflects an increase in training hours, because we're trying to prepare people because we're not going to as many fires as we used to, and they're not getting the experience. So we need, we need people to be trained and prepared for whatever comes next.
So, Madam Chair, maybe we also think about things like, for instance, if you're, working in public safety and education, whatever, maybe you don't pay any real estate taxes in this town. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
right.
4 or 5 grand potentially. Maybe we set up a program that says, if you're a firefighter, public safety, police, whatever, and you have kids, we're gonna plan for those kids to give them some assistance when they get to be at college age. I mean, some hook or a couple hooks that say there's a reason to come to Harwich, and then there's a reason to stay here. We gotta start thinking that way.
No, I agree. I think, and again, I think it really requires some creative thinking and puts us ahead of some other towns. I mean, I think we've seen different ways that we're trying to help younger people stay in town with the preschool subsidy, which other towns are doing. So, as long as we can continue to sustain that, these kind of things are important, and they have to be out of the box. So, anybody have any other?
Yeah, Mark. So last year, we added 4 firefighters, $200,000 savings.
Yep.
That's not working. You run into situations, correct me if I'm wrong, you still have 1 fireman in the station.
Yep.
So even though next year we knew we had that plan, we knew that was still gonna be a possibility?
Yep.
One person?
When we talked about it, and Chairman McCaskill, Selectman McCaskill and I, he was the chairman at the time, had this conversation, that, this was a step. We talked about hiring the 4 and saving some overtime money to offset the hiring cost, with the understanding that next year or the year after, we're gonna keep advocating for the department that we were gonna be back trying to get that minimum staffing up. If I were to look long-term, I see we're very similar to the town of Dennis in size and run volume. They're a little bit busier than we are. Their shift minimum is 10. 5 in each station. So when the ambulance goes out, there's still 2 people back to handle that next call. I see us eventually getting there. It's just a long road, and I try not to dump that on the table all at once, because I think it's shell shock. But that's, if you were to ask me where I'd want to see us in, probably 5 years, that's where I'd want to see us. But 10 minimum is probably 12, 13, or 14 total shift strength, so that there's some savings in there. You're not replacing for position. You're not forcing people to work overtime because your maximum shift strength is your minimum shift strength. So I think we have a ways to go to get there, and we're just trying to get there baby steps.
2 more questions. I don't want to hold this up. Would you think about, instead of the overtime, hiring people full-time instead of using the overtime? Second question is, we've spoken about this before. We run a 3-man crew, in part because of the distance to the hospital. Marshfield Fire Department, they're about 20 miles from South Shore Hospital. What they do, and I don't know the size of their department, whatever, they send a 2-man ambulance crew or a 3-man ambulance crew with a car. Patients there, needs basic life safety, doesn't need a paramedic. They run just the 2 to the hospital. If it is a serious thing, they put the 3 in the car, and yes, you go back to the station, you only have 1 guy, but in a lot of cases, basic life safety, you can send the 2 guys with the car back. Just a thought, and I think you wrote about this, Craig, last year.
And that's our current model right now. When a priority 3 call comes in, there's levels for dispatch, priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. When a priority 3 call comes in, that's something with a fall, a leg injury, an arm injury, a little less serious call. When that call comes in, the ambulance goes out with 2, and the car goes out with 1. So we have that model right now. Okay. If for some reason the call necessitates an extra person because now there's a fracture in somebody's leg and they're given narcotics or blood thinners, or it actually, it requires an additional person, that person will leave the car there, and the 3 people will go to the hospital. But we're using that model right now.
And in answer to your first question about more staffing, yeah, we absolutely contemplated this year asking for another 4, and then that would make shift strength 10, and then we could drop to basically just carry the model forward. We could still drop 2, but we figured after asking for 4 last year that it would be a tall ask to come back and ask for 4 more positions this year, so we can kind of bridge the gap with some overtime and make it work, and then get to a point down the future where we're probably going to have to have more staffing. But
Safer grant, any chance on that?
not for the overtime. It would be for hiring full-time positions. It's absolutely an opportunity. We haven't received. We didn't get it, even though we applied for it last year, and then, or 2 years ago, we ended up not getting it. So for staffing, we struggle sometimes with the grant metrics of being worthy. We do well in other grant metrics, but not when it comes to staffing.
I think you're worthy.
Appreciate that.
All right, anybody else? Okay, we're good.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Have a
Yeah,
good
and why don't
weekend.
we take a, Joe tells me we're doing well on the schedule, so why don't we take a
Well ahead of us.
quick break?
We're well ahead.
If I could just ask, nowhere in this book do I see the enhancement of service requests.
So, if I could, Chief and Deputy, could you come back for a minute? And can you walk me through the reports? So the comment was there's no information in the book on enhancement of services.
Yep.
Are you aware of the packet? Can you guide us to any information that would get to the enhancement of services?
If I could, Madam Chair, without going through that exercise, there has to be a simpler method than these munis reports. And thank you all in the municipal world for dealing with munis reports, because it's as clear as mud to me. When you did your budget, and I'm speaking more globally now, Joe, not just the fire department, but in every instance where there was an enhancement of services, they had to put in a request for that and comments and writing, and I think that would be a helpful document for the board and the finance committee. Can I request those? Obviously not today, but can we get the comments, the ask, and the explanation? Because I know you did the work.
So we have a budget or an explanation of what the EOS is, or the enhancement of services is. I'll forward it to both chairmen's for the boards, for distribution, or to the town administrator.
And I'm really asking the town administrator and the finance director for a document that is more clear than the munis reports,
For everybody.
for every enhancement of services.
And I
not
would
the
tell you
fire
that even the munis report is limited, and we talked about this briefly coming in, because you have about 150 characters that you can type, it's like Twitter, and once you get to the end, you're done, so it's hard. But we have a budget memo that we can certainly explain in detail
Yeah.
what we're looking for and why.
That would be helpful, Tom.
So my ask is for every department with enhancement of services, that the board and the finance committee get those. Thank you.
You'll have it today.
Thank you.
Still
So,
ahead of schedule.
okay, so we could take a brief 5-minute break.
Thank you.
our session.
So, good morning, thank you again.
So we're going to come back to,
I'm gonna ship it to him. He asked me to, if he asked for a volunteer, so.
so Peter, we're going to start again.
I do have.
That's okay, so let's start again.
So,
It will go in an envelope.
thank you, Madam Chair. Mr.
your
Chairman,
brains.
next up is Highway, which is how we have it coded in Munis, but of course, we know it to be our Department of Public Works. We have our Director of Public Works, Link Hooper, here. In your materials, that starts with Department 411. In the departmental operating budget document, it's page 3. And the next year budget document, it's page 12. And the next year, current year comparison, it is page 19. And with that, Madam Chair, I turn it back over to you and to Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. So again, I will go before, unless, Link, you want to give any overview, I'll first go to the board to see if they have any specifics.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a few brief remarks.
Go ahead, sure.
I am joined here this morning with Sean Livy, Facilities Maintenance Manager, and Kyle Edson, Vehicle Maintenance Manager. Those guys both work miracles in their respective divisions, and that's actually an understatement. They are thrilled to be here this morning with me.
Make it Sunday, you know.
I'd also like to say, a couple weeks ago, I was before the board on Monday evening, and we had an impending snowstorm come up, and I was concerned and said it's going to take longer because of all the turnover we've had with snowplow contractors, with internal staff. In fact, our highway manager is pretty new at the job as well. So we knew there was going to be some idiosyncrasies. I would like to say that they all exceeded my expectations a great deal. I thought relative to other towns, we looked pretty decent. And a heartfelt thanks to internal staff as well as the private plow contractors. We were concerned about having sitting vehicles. That didn't materialize. I believe we had all the town plows mobilized. And although there is some damage and so forth that we're going to be out repairing, I thought overall it went far better than anticipated. It was at times controlled chaos at best, but we got through it, and thank you for everyone's patience.
Thank you, Link, and I would agree. My street was very well done, so I think they did a great job.
Never say that as a selectman. You want to.
No, not just my street,
Your street was the
Peter.
last one that was touched.
Not just my street, 39, all of it.
It was horrible.
Oh, my God.
Ours. Two selectmen, it's still horrible.
Horrible.
Well, I'm not surprised.
By the way, now that the water department's gone, I'm probably the only ex-selectman that has a fire hydrant in their backyard.
Okay. Go ahead.
As far as budget, I'd like to point out that the DPW was able to come within the directives, the budget directive this year. We came out with, I believe, 2.3% on salary and wage, which was all contractually driven, and we came out with 1.3% on expenses. We were pretty fortunate, and the only thing that was removed from the budget was the one EOS request. And with that, I'd be happy to cover anything.
Great, thank you, Link. Any specific questions from board members?
I would just ask if you just explain your enhancement of service request.
Thank you, Selectman McCaskill. I have had a standing request for the last 3+ years for an additional cemetery worker. That request was essentially my commitment to the cemetery commissioners who really wanted to see additional service. 20 years ago, there were 2 people in this department that provided service to roughly 50 acres. Today, we've expanded the cemeteries to 100 acres, and yet we still have 2 full-time people. The only way we make the cemeteries acceptable is we move staff around as needed. A good example is for Memorial Day, we basically shut down everything else and send for probably 3 to 4 days, all hands on decks to all the cemeteries to make them look good. There's only so much 2 guys two guys can do. That was the request. I will say that that was kind of driven by the cemetery commissioners. They have not asked me this year. I simply put it in. My real feeling is there's been a lot of emphasis on facility maintenance, and if I was to receive an EOS position, I still would like to go back and shore up the custodial division and take that off of Sean's plate, which he, I believe, will tell you he spends 30 to 40% of his time managing that division. If we had a custodial foreman in-house, my expectation would be that would no longer be Sean having to manage the daily operations of the custodial unit, and his time could be spent better doing procurement activities, troubleshooting activities. We could spend his time a lot more effectively.
One follow-up.
Sure, go ahead.
So can we get a snapshot, both boards, in short order of what that position would look like and what that cost would be? Because if I'm hearing you correctly, you'd rather have that than this.
That is, you are hearing me correctly.
Can we get that?
Absolutely.
To Peter's point earlier, the sooner the better?
Yeah, I've asked for that in the past, and then I flipped over. It was probably 4 years ago or so forth, but we'd be happy to get that to the administrator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up, the initial question was the same as Michael's, but I'm not quite understanding the enhancement. Is that the same thing that the cemetery administrator would be advocating on that end, or is this somebody actually out in the field doing physical work?
No, this would be working for the DPW Cemetery Division, mowing grass, weed whacking and mowing grass.
Okay, got it, because in terms of the other part of this,
We don't-
your metric is fine as far as it goes, but if you go back to the same 20 years, the number of burials, forgetting about the acreage that you folks are taking care of, the number of burials have been kind of static through the years. And the administrator itself was a part-time position 20 years ago. So this is actually out there doing stuff on the actual physical property.
Yes, again, it would be mowing grass, weed whacking.
I'm with Michael. I'd like to see that, like, in writing for all of us.
Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Link, thank you for being here. And if, I feel comfortable asking this question, because if it's difficult for Select Board Member McCaskill to understand Munis, imagine where I'm sitting right now. So bear with me a little. Forecasting and budgeting for maintenance on all our town's buildings. How do you do it? Where would I find it? Is there a number for all town buildings? Is there a number for each town building? I would assume that has got to be a,
Do you have 15 copies?
No,
of it?
sir, I'm gonna hold it up and in our internal budget, this is what we have, is a spreadsheet with each building broken down. Things, sprinklers, alarms, elevated, pest control, everything that is considered maintenance has a number through here if required.
and would I be accurate in saying that is nowhere in anything I have?
That would be accurate.
But you could request
is
a copy of it be sent to everybody sitting around this table.
Well, I was
That's
just
exactly
going to
what I
make that
just said.
request,
That's
so, yeah.
What he said.
If you
It-
could share that with us.
Yeah, I would love to get a copy of that, and I think everybody else would like to get a copy of that as well.
We can do it right now, or we can do it after the fact, whichever you prefer.
Yes. Right now would be
It's
great.
happening right now.
Madam
Now
Chair?
would be great. Why wait?
Thank you, Kathleen.
Madam Chair? Madam Chair?
Don?
If I might, riffing off of what...
Well, I wasn't done, but go ahead. I'll let
Well,
you-
this is what you were saying.
Oh,
I
thanks.
want to be
telling
able,
you.
I want to see this in every budget, because it's hard for me to be able to look at a summary number and understand what the heck is going on.
What Don said too.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. Definitely just trying to wrap my arms around this whole process, and I think that for me was an important one, so thank you for sending it out right away, Joe.
So while we wait for that, I'll go to Peter.
Okay, thank you. I have two topics before we get to the rest of my board. One is, we look at, the maintenance part of it all. I don't really have a good sense for how backed up we are on maintenance. Are we keeping up with, with the demands? Do we have projects that aren't getting done? because we're limited either in time or money or whatever. You know, where are we on the status of getting things done in maintenance? So we keep up with it with our team? You tell me.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I'll take a stab at it, and I'll let Sean correct me if I misspeak or you want further information. Sean is an excellent example, a hands-on guy who troubleshoots most of our more complicated HVAC systems in town and keeps a handle on that. We do have a backlog in procurements, particularly with facilities maintenance. He's a one-man shop. He's a one-man guy. When I went back to talking about maybe a custodial foreman, this was what we're talking, exactly what I'm driving at, is Sean's time could be better spent doing more administrative type duties, doing some of the procurements, some of the backlogs as we talked. I think a lot of his time is spent putting out fires. I think a lot of his time is responding to no heat calls, this is broke, that is broke, and you know, where the best of intentions, you sit down and I'm gonna do this procurement on Monday, and it still isn't done come Friday because he's been putting out fires all week. Anything you wanna add, sir? That's good. So you know, and there are a lot of procurements for past articles that we work with administration, provide updates. So it's just a lot of his time is not his own.
Okay.
Much like my time isn't my own. I know when we originally developed the position, we hoped for more administration than it turned out to be.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Sean's very good at his job, and as a consequence, he's needed his boots on the ground.
So when we look at something, I'm probably totally out base here, but, you know, I know we had provided some funds to, say, replace some windows down at the cultural center. Have we done that, or is it in the process, or it's not gonna be done for another year, or something?
That's exactly what Mike's talking about. That takes time to sit down and design what kind of windows are we gonna put in and get with the potential contractors to get their input, and then get the right specifications, that will go out to bid. That's what I don't have time to do.
Okay, so,
Some things are in the works. For example, the boiler replacement was also included in that. That is, you know, we had given that a contract to Rise Engineering back in September. And just to let you know how long it takes to write specs, they're still not done. And that's one of their jobs. So when doing that for other things, that takes a backside to a no heat call.
Okay, so when I look at, if someone said, let's do another project at, say, 204, I'm just picking on that because there's a bunch of stuff down there, would it be wise to say, hey, let's get done what's in the backlog before we take on anything new, because we're not keeping up with it. I mean, you know, instead of tying that money up, maybe we delay it, I'm just making this up, for a year or two, instead of just building up this, you know, set of funds to be able to do things down the building. I don't know, it just seems like, my impression is, just as you're saying, things are taking a lot longer to get done for whatever reason, and it just stretches things out. I don't know. I guess then my next question is, that you won't have an answer for, but maybe here, I know we don't have a town engineer, and I know we contract out some of those services. Could we contract out some of that to get done, some of this procurement that you need? I don't know.
That's what I've been working towards. And that's why I have Rise Engineering. They're working on specifications for the boiler replacement. I've also had the specifications drawn up for the generator at that same building.
So when you do that, does it come under your budget, or does it come under this town engineer budget?
That came out of the article to
Okay,
contract that.
okay. All right. Okay, now, if I could shift from that?
Sure.
My favorite question all the time has to do with the C&D contractor, lack of a contractor, whatever, with where we're sending our stuff and how we're doing with all that.
We did sign a contract, I think a year ago or something like that, which was a 3-year deal, a base of $114 plus some fuel charges. They're reliable. Demo and MSW is trended down. The economy is slowed. So we're doing fine. The numbers, so commercial MSW normally do about 5,000 tons. I think we ended doing a calendar year just shy of 4,000 tons. Demo, we've had a high a few years ago of like 13,000 tons. We're hovering around 10,000.
So you're not putting a sign on it anymore that says?
No, sir.
We're not taking C and D or
Yeah,
whatever?
no, I believe a lot of this was pandemic-driven, and we were just going gangbusters.
Yeah.
Everybody had a lot of time on their hand, the tear downs were going everywhere you look, and it was just constant. We could barely keep our head above water.
Okay. Well, it's good to hear it's calmed down. I mean,
It has calmed down,
yeah,
yes, sir.
yeah, okay.
I have a question.
Michelle?
So, do the services that are on this sheet, are they sourced from, so let's just say HVAC? Are all those sourced, do we have one town contract with an HVAC provider? And how does it work with 30B and procurement of services? I know that, I just went through a procurement course.
Fun, isn't it?
It's time consuming. But how do we do that? Like, what's our process for procurement and bidding this stuff out, and how does that work?
Well, that time-consuming aspect is exactly what we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
So Sean does what he can. If it doesn't meet bid thresholds, we try to get, quotes, use best practices, use some county contracts, and stuff that needs to go out to bid. He works with Megan, and we get stuff on the street and try to get companies in to do what we need done.
So do we aggressively contract, and when those contracts are up for renewal, go right back out, or, because there's a lot of money here?
I don't think most.
HVAC is probably the most expensive item that I deal with.
Yeah.
And, to give you an example of the costs, and a lot of it is also prior, they're.
Oh, Sean, can you come up to the table? I'm having trouble.
Sorry.
So some of the things that we have, I'll call it proprietary because it was written, computerized information for, say, this building. The BMS for this building is all done by Siemens, and just the valve for heat for here is not working right now. We've got a quote for it, $7,000. That's for the computer input and for the valve itself.
Yeah.
And then for the installation. So because I have a company that has written the programming for this building.
Yeah.
To go out and have somebody else go into it, I'd have to give that up, request that information to be given. So I'll stick with that contractor that I'm working with. It's a service call, it's under $10,000. It's best practices.
Yeah.
If we had anything that would go like a bad compressor, we had this happen at the community center, and the compressor was $11,000. I had to go out to get 3 quotes.
Oh, good, yeah.
So that's my practices
Got
that I
it.
use. Luckily, I have a staff and myself that have experience in this. We try to do a lot of it ourselves before we call anybody.
Yeah.
So you might be looking at just parts.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, Sean has he has 3 staff members. He has a plumber on staff, he has a carpenter on staff, and a craftsman.
That's great, yeah. Yeah, I know, it's a very time-consuming process, but an important one. Yeah, thank you.
Mark?
I agree with help for Sean. He's gonna be dealing potentially with $1 million worth of work, especially like in 204, whatever. You brought up an assistant for Sean. Will you have the ability, since you bring on the additional like custodial help, do you have the ability to transfer down to the cemeteries to help out? Say like you hire one person, custodial in charge. Do you have the freedom to move people around as the needs are required? I'm thinking of the cemetery.
Yeah.
That model's the only way we survive. Going back, talking about the cemeteries, 2 people can't possibly make a real difference, particularly if you're coming up against Memorial Day holiday, where everybody's visiting the cemeteries. So yes, we move people to where they're needed, and particularly on that week, we shut down just about everything and send people to the cemetery. That usually takes us about 3 days with all hands on deck. So, yes, if Sean had an additional person and they were needing a cemetery, we'd need them in the cemetery. If they needed to help Kyle out with vehicle maintenance, they would help Kyle out with vehicle maintenance.
Okay, just one other question. The Finance Committee, on our members here, one's a professional engineer with electrical background. Another one has construction background. People in the public have experience with generators, electrical. I'd like to ask if it's possible to get a copy of the engineering report for the Harbor Master's Office. It's public safety, I totally back it, but I wanna, I think we'd like to understand the cost of $200,000. I think the engineering report would help explain it, because all of us I've spoken to believe in it. We just want to understand the $200,000 cost. So my question is, can us here on the Finance Committee get a copy of the engineering report for the generator at the harbor?
Absolutely, you pay for it.
Well, if I can correct the record, the town meeting paid for it through articles that were endorsed by the Select Board and then supported by Finance Committee. So the question of, will we share information, the answer is always yes. But I want to remind everybody that through the Select Board, we have a strong procurement process. While we do have folks in the community that can speak to this, I don't want to diminish the work of the staff members we have, present company included, that have that expertise as well. So it's not that we won't share information, but there's a process that we have to go through both legally and procedurally at the administration and staff level. So we can share all that, and I think in a minute you're going to, well, I know in a minute you're going to hear, shortly you're going to hear from the Harbor Master, and he can also speak to that request and those needs.
Thank you, Joe.
So just to follow up on that, I know historically that with gensets, wherever they are, we're looking at either propane or diesel or whatever. Now that we've come into the 21st century and battery technology has advanced so much, as well as solar as well, have we ever thought about having an emergency backup system which consists of solar panels and batteries to cover whatever that energy requirement is for 3, 4, 5 days to get us through some kind of an event, as opposed to doing an internal combustion engine? I'm just throwing that out.
We have actually, and during the last round of solar at the golf course, because we were putting solar there, we looked into the batteries, and the battery bank that would be required was so large and so expensive, it wasn't the right thing to do. I can't remember the cost, but I remember that we looked at doing it for the cart barn and actually making a battery bank in there to keep the carts going, and it just ended up being not worth it.
So we have a generator over there now? Oh, so we had nothing.
But we have nothing, but that's
Yeah,
where
okay.
we did look at that,
Okay.
doing that exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that having a generator down at the harbor is much more important than having a generator at the golf course, but I'm not a golfer, so, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Jeff?
Yeah, and thanks again. Hearing what you all do on a daily basis, and kind of get the feeling you're key person dependent, so I'd be in real support of bringing on another staff person in the event one of these 3 gentlemen aren't able to perform their duties. I mean, that would put a significant compression on our staff. So not just to alleviate it when things are going great, but the key person dependency is something that I'm feeling could easily happen here if one of the 3 of you were not able to work. Link, do you have so I see $342,100. Is that up or down from last year?
Flat.
Most of it's level, yeah.
For the last 3 years.
I think some of the, totally flat?
Yes.
I'll go with that.
Yeah, what's your line? Once you get a yes?
Yes, sir. Once you get to yes, you stop talking.
You stop talking, so that, okay. Yeah, that's all I have, thank you.
Could I just ask, could we redirect an unfilled town engineer salary and wages to help these people out? Whether it's a position over there, maybe use that money to do that? I mean, it looks like we haven't had a town engineer in a couple of years.
So we're still looking for a town engineer. We're advertising for a town engineer, and then we're also using, I always blank on their name, it's the group out of VHB out of Watertown. So we're using VHB for certain engineering services. So while we're talking about that, we're still advertising for a position for engineer.
Madam Chair, if I can follow up.
Sure.
First, to the comment, can we move the salary over? We cannot. My understanding is we have an obligation to the collective bargaining agreement that allows for that position. We have not abandoned the position yet. And if we were going to do so, there would have to be impact bargaining with that management association on the position. However, I think, as you may have been getting to, there can be transfers done for funds that aren't expended at a certain period of time. We could do that, but if I could go back for a moment to a board member's earlier comment about a position, I just want to ask of the Select Board and the Finance Committee, while you're all assembled, is there consensus that we should be creating a position, as the director said earlier in his presentation, an enhancement of services relative to facilities maintenance? Is that what the member was getting to, or?
Are you referring to me?
Yeah, what sort of output would you like us to get into on that specifically?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. I'd like to explore it and see what everybody else here thinks, for sure.
Michael?
Yeah, and back to my comments to Link, was to put something together. What we have for an enhancement of services now is not actually what he wants or what he supports. So I would like to see first what he supports. It certainly makes sense. As far as the key man dependent Selectman Handler said, I would agree for Kyle and Sean. Link has Kim, and I can't believe he's making it through this without Kim today, but.
Nor can I, Selectman McCaskill.
But, Joe, to your question, I want to see what it looks like.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And I agree with that.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
More info.
And my thought is, if it allows us to better keep up with the maintenance required on all these different facilities we have, because if you don't keep up with the maintenance, it's just going to keep snowballing, getting worse. So I would love to see a proposal.
Yeah, well, I
Anybody
also
else have
think,
any comments?
I also think that, to Link's earlier points about the work that Sean is doing and constantly having to go from one thing to the next, and then the procurement falls behind, gets back to your point about what needs to be assessed and addressed. So I would certainly be in favor of us looking at what that enhancement of service looks like in that position.
Thank you.
Yep.
A number that jumped out at me is the $70,000 under recreation and youth for.
Can you speak up,
Dan, you
Dan?
have to speak into the microphone. They
speak
can't
up,
hear
Dan.
you.
The 70,000, I can answer.
$70,000 for the restroom sanitizing. What's behind that number?
You want to answer, or you want me to?
I'll defer to facility maintenance.
That's our current contract for cleaning the restrooms in the summertime. Prior to COVID, we were able to hire people to do that. We had summer hires. During COVID, we found that nobody wanted to touch bathrooms. And since then, we found it was more efficient to use a contractor to provide the supplies and services.
So are these the restrooms at all the beaches?
All the beaches,
Okay,
Brooks
that's-
Park,
that's
and
what I thought.
White House Field.
Thank you.
Is there another question?
I guess a little bit off, but as I guess the country seems to be going through this energy transition period these days, can you speak at all to the kinds of things that you guys engage in when various changeover of equipment comes up that addresses, or whether necessarily addresses, or just the department wants to address any new technological opportunities?
I think every time there's grant rounds that we look at to put solar on facilities, on top of buildings or on land we may have owned. Excellent example is probably 10 years ago, the solar array went on the capped landfill on 27 acres there. As far as vehicles, most of the vehicles that we buy, and I don't want to misspeak, I believe are exempt if they're over 3/4 ton or 1 ton or something like that. Pardon me?
Over 8,500 GVW.
Yeah, so just about all of the rolling stock we have in the DPW is exempt from those requirements. And there's not a lot available in the larger trucks. Beyond that, I defer to Sean. He uses the Green Communities Acts and grants that we have like that with some of the facility replacing older equipment and boilers and so forth.
So everything we look at, we do look at how, energy conservation and, as Lynn said, I work with the green communities. We're currently finishing up our last grant. That will allow us to go forth for the next grant. Green Communities has changed. As of last summer, there will be no more fossil fuel projects, which is what we've done. We replaced boilers with high-efficient gas boilers. Will no longer be funded through Green Communities, so we'll be looking at other things like we have at the fire station and at the Harbor Masters building, and that's basically heat pumps for,
Yep.
But that's what they're looking at right now is the high-efficient heat pumps.
Thank you.
I just asked a quick question. Next year, no more fossil fuel heating equipment, is that what you said?
Starting last year, actually the last Green Communities project that was approved using fossil fuels was the community center's boiler replacement that we just completed.
All right, so at 204 Sisson, aren't you replacing that equipment with gas?
We are, and that is not a Green Communities funded grant project.
Okay, so if it was Green Communities,
It would be required.
we would have
be.
to. Why, I don't want to hold it up, but why wouldn't we try and do a Green Communities type of thing on that?
That would be awesome, but we did it because of cost. It was a 500,000 versus 8 million.
Everything's ready.
For like
So being green is expensive.
You have to have lots of green, right? Okay, thank you.
Any?
Just a quick touch back on Peter's comments related to engineering. Where is the engineering services money coming from now? Because we're not using, like we do in other cases, we're not using the engineering salary for engineering services. So do we have for all these subcontracted ones, where's that money coming from?
So we do use the engineer's salary line through transfer, I believe technically, for general engineering services for the town VHB. I think what the director and the maintenance manager were getting to is there are other engineering costs that may be related to articles appropriating that may be separate and distinct from the engineering for the town.
So I'm looking at a report, and I apologize, not everybody has it. I did just send it to Peter, and I sent it to the board. But it's something I requested from finance, and I got this week. And it was the sources from line 9 on the free cash certification. So it's the 2023 year-to-date budget uses. So it looks like we budgeted, Joe, $131,239 into the engineer position, and then $131,239 defaulted back into that line item in free cash. Am I reading that wrong? And I guess where I'm going with that is, if we have that much money and we don't have an employee, it would be great to have one. I agree with Julie. Can the highway department, DPW, i.e. Sean, use any of that money? And I know this is a management decision, so I'll stop at my ask and request. Can we use any of that money to help Sean with engineering services to finish some of these projects that we desperately need to finish?
So not having
I
specifics on
apologize,
that,
yeah.
that's all right, I can find it. But I believe, and I'll look to the finance director to aid me in my answer, technically the answer would be yes, because we do transfers. We typically do them after town meeting and towards the end of the year. But there is a process where in the select board, the finance committee, administrator and finance director do transfers.
Thank you.
So I believe we could transfer those funds through that process.
Thank you. That's
And if I
not
could
an
just
ask, Joe, that's just a suggestion, and obviously, if Sean could tap some of that money for some services to help him, that would be great until we fill that important role. We all know what Griffin Ryder did for us during Phase 2 of the wastewater project, and it was an invaluable employee there that we lost, unfortunately, but it'd be nice to fill that, but being that we're getting no applicants, I think we have $131,000 to work with.
And I would encourage that, quite frankly.
If I could, first of all, the finance director concurred with the process that I outlined, and I also want to put out there, as town administrator, and I think I can speak for the assistant town administrator, we are keenly interested in getting that SEIU position, known as town engineer, filled for all the reasons you said. So we're completely in agreement on the need for that. In the meantime, I will say that we are very well served by VHB, ironically, the former employer of the former engineer, so they know the deal. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
What's TC?
I don't have any, you answered my questions on the green communities. I was wondering where we were with those grants, and I'm not surprised to hear that that's it for fossil fuels, so all of the energy efficiency items are gonna be more expensive, and, you know, that's from building a house to, obviously, commercial buildings. It has an even bigger impact, so we have to try to plan accordingly. And as I said, we're constantly trying to recruit an engineer, but to the discussion we've just had, of course, monies can be moved to assist, so whatever we can do to make things easier and move the procurement along. I know that's a pretty big list. So, hearing no other questions from any other members, I'm free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
Now we have John.
So, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, next up is John Rendon, our Harbor Master, to present the Harbor Master budget. It's Department 633, and the relevant documents can be found on page 4 of the operating budget section, page 19 of the next year budget, and page 29 of the next year, current year comparison. And with that, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, John. Good to have you.
How are you?
Again, I'll defer to you if you have any opening statements you want to make, or if not, I can go to board
Sure, I'll
members.
just say thanks for being here and giving me the opportunity to present the Harbor Master Department budget. Just real quick, I think our department is doing great. We're fully staffed. We had a new staff member join us, the dockhand position in Andrew Sosa, who we got from DPW, who we're thrilled with and is doing a great job. And so our budget reflects really, there's no enhancement of services. I think the increases with regards to staff are contractual in nature. And, you know, there's a big glaring increase in my operating budget with regard to dredging, and I know we can speak to that. But that is, that's an important item, and that's the biggest increase you see. So beyond that, take any questions.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
Any specific questions from select board members? All right, yeah.
Yeah, just, John, can you expand on the dredging costs and where you're going with that? And then one thing to consider for this year in a tight budget year, I know I've brought it up to you in the past, is that leftover money from the article. And I know you're increasing your budget because of the dredging costs primarily. And we would only be kicking the can down the road until next year because it's inevitable that we're gonna pay this more money. Is there any chance of using that leftover article money for this year and reducing the budget? And then, for the people that don't know, can you just explain why our dredging costs are going where they're going?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, gosh. 6 months ago or so, I'm part of the Dredge Advisory Committee. Pretty much all local harbor masters are. And we got presented by the Barnstable County Dredge Superintendent Director that they were looking to increase funds. And so the county actually hired a consultant to go through and do an analysis of what it was costing the county dredge to operate their equipment, to do the work, and what the towns were paying, and they did an analysis. Well, that analysis came back a few months ago. And to everybody's surprise, it was a significant increase in per cubic yard cost. So currently, we're paying $12 a cubic yard to dredge sand. And the initial study came back and said, well, in order for the county to break even, we need to charge $28.10 a cubic yard. You know, and so there's been a lot of discussion back and forth. I know our town administrator and his group were briefed on the results. We obviously, as an advisory group, provided all comments recommending that they take a more gradual approach to help offset the budget hurt on all the towns, especially we were right in the middle of budget season when this came up. Well, pretty much all that input that we've provided was disregarded, and just this past week, I got the approval notice from the Assembly of Delegates that they have indeed approved the rate increase starting this coming fiscal year. And it went from $28.10 a cubic yard to $26.50. So it was a little bit of a decrease, but not much. So how does that impact our budget? You know, I get currently funded about $170,000 in our operating budget to dredge sand. And that accounts for about 14,000 cubic yards of material. That's kind of where I average what we do. Some years we're a little less, some years we're a little more, but it depends on what channels I dredge. Every year we dredge. And so that 170, you know, got me to where I need to be. In order to be at that level, the need doesn't change. I'm still gonna have to dredge about 14,000 cubic yards of material. But now that need goes from 170,000 to 371,000. So a $200,000 increase for our operating budget. And that, all towns are facing this now because of that drastic increase in the per cubic yard change. So obviously my preference, I kind of fought pretty hard back several years ago. I used to have to go in front of town meeting every year with an article to request dredge money. That's just how it had been when I got here. And I had, you know, made the case that it should be part of our operating budget, which it has for many years. And I'd like to continue down that road if possible. But I know this is kind of a tough thing. So to answer your question, Mr. McCaskill, yes, we have a couple of things that we can pull from, and I can give you my preference, but we have two past articles that are left over from the days when I used to have to go and ask for money through town meeting, okay? So we have two articles. One is an article from 2014 and another article from 2016 where we have dredge money still available. One account has $36,400 in it, and the other account has $81,627 in that range. So can we use that? Yes, and I would point to the accountant and the experts, but yes, I think we can pull from that. But my preference would be, we also have two receipts reserve funds, one where all our mooring money goes into, and one where all our waterway user fees go into. And those are set up to assist us in managing our waterways and our facilities, and it's within Mass General Law to use those funds for these purposes. And my preference would be to go to those funds to help offset this and allow me to maintain these two funds that really provides me a reserve, because there's so much unknown when you dredge. And, you know, I've said this before, you've probably heard me say it, it's nice to have that little bit of a reserve or backstop that if something unexpected comes up, I have some available funds. Because these other two research reserve funds, I can't spend it without the approval of town meeting. And there are urgent needs that come up where I need funding now instead of having to wait till town meeting. So that would be my recommendation on how we address this line item.
Thank you, John. Joe?
And immediately to that point, if you look at the sources and uses table, the indirect line there under revenue, that's already contemplated. Both of those accounts are looking to be drawn from for these purposes. That's another factor that increases that line year over year.
Just to follow up, one statement and one question. Your opinion obviously matters to me, so. You do an amazing job with a very small department and a huge responsibility. So our facilities, harbor facilities across the board have been well-maintained, and we're second to nobody on the Cape. Thank you. Has there been any discussion amongst you and other harbor masters to look at private contractors rather than Barnstable County if this rate continues to change? Is there a baseline where we have to go out to somebody else and we should consider, or do we just accept these fee increases?
Well, I mean, I can tell you, based upon my experience, back when we dredged Allen Harbor Basin, remember? We took all the docks out, we came in and we brought a contractor in to dredge, and that was 10 years ago, whatever it was a long time ago. We were paying $68 a cubic yard for that back then. And I know the county did an analysis to justify their huge increase of what it would cost to go out to private entities, and it was more than double of what their new rate is. So it's expensive to go private.
Thank you for that, John, and I apologize. One more, Julie, if I can. It looks like on that same document that none of you have, it looks like about $84,000 was turned back from dredge money in your budget last year that wasn't used. In thinking about planning, and we've had this conversation with other departments today, how do we keep that money in your budget?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the reason for that is, one, we're successful at getting some grant money, so that helps. For the past 5 of the last 6 years, we've been able to get grant funding from the state to help offset the dredge work we do at Allen Harbor. So that's helpful. But the other reason is because of some permitting delays at the county. I don't know if you know, I've been trying to get our 5-year comprehensive dredge plan renewed, and it's taken me 4 years to do that. Unbelievable. Anyways, so we lost one of our projects, the Round Cove project that was scheduled last year. It got pushed to this year, and we have completed it. We just completed it in December. But that's one of the reasons, and that's points to you just don't know, and that's why I'd like to have some money available in those instances. We were able to cover it because of the grant funding. But I wish we could keep it.
Thank you, John. Sure. Appreciate it.
Any other board members? So I look at this as similar to what we just heard from the water department, in the sense of wanting to know that they have their money set aside for different things that are gonna come up, and they're gonna have to address them, rather than have to come back and look to the board to, you know, make other transfers. So as much as it's a difficult budget year, I think having this money, it's maintaining our waterways, it's important. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Peter.
You know, I would say, I think with doubling of the rate, that the county's gonna have a problem in that some municipalities won't be able to do their dredging this year because they can't afford it. So instead of having a dredge that's fully operational, you know, 7 days a week, blah, 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 whatever it is, they're gonna have some dry periods where they're not using it. Well, guess what? That's gonna jack their costs up to you, the user, because it's gonna have to get spread around who's using it, not necessarily, okay, here's our capacity. So I think this thing's gonna snowball in the future. More to come, obviously, and I agree with the concept of let's get this thing funded and do it. I do have a question, though, because you're the guy on the waterfront. Just observations going around, you see high tide these days, it seems like high tide is higher than usual, right? Particularly like, you know, at the Herring River, you go there and you see what that parking lot is just, you know, covered. what are you seeing, and do you think in the next 5, 10 years, whatever, we're going to do something actively because of that?
I mean, I'm not educated enough to really give you all I can tell you is my observations, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we've had 3 southerly storms that have brought in an enormous amount of water to all of our landings. I mean, the water was 3/4 way up the Allen Harbor parking lot. Our front road in front of the harbor was totally underwater. Herring River, same. And, you know, this year alone has been very significant compared to past years. So I don't know if it's an anomaly or what, but I think there's real concern, absolutely. And that's why, you know, somewhere down the line, we have our bulkhead scheduled for the marina to be done. And we got to think real hard whether that bulkhead needs to be significantly higher than what it is right now.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to play defense here before too
I mean,
long,
really,
right? I mean,
it's true. And it's, yeah, I would agree, but I don't know.
I'm just trying to forecast the future a little bit, like, you know, what's coming around the corner.
I know.
I think we're going to spend a lot of money on the waterfront, quite frankly, for that reason.
So I just had a follow-up for info you had asked. Kathleen can speak to some of that. You gonna?
Yeah, the comment was about money that may be carried over, if I can, do you both know what you're referring to?
I do, yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
I guess, just for clarity's sake, just because we're asking specific questions, if you wouldn't mind repeating the question
The only
specifically?
question, I actually already know the answer. Can we carry over the money that he turned back this year for dredging that fell into that line item 9 on the free cash certification? And because it was unspent budget, it really does have to fall back to free cash.
Exactly. Yeah, it's already been
I
taken
know,
into
I know the answer. In a perfect world,
Okay,
we would just
yeah.
give John his money back, but.
Yeah. Yeah, the only, not to, you know, go too far astray, but you can encumber money in a sense if you have, at the end of the year, you have a specific service that you've contracted for but haven't paid for yet. You can carry forward special articles, but you can't normally carry forward a balance that just happens to remain in a department's budget. It will go to free cash, so the money, you know, is still within the cycle of funds, but it's not directly available by that department.
Right.
Just back to a previous statement, John's done a great job with not only the dredging and our waterways, but he's also done a great job replenishing our beaches. And then whatever we have left over, we managed to get some money out of from some private residents. So the program works. I would advocate for giving you back that money.
It does work, and I tell you, it'd be nice to be able to, you know, there's such a demand for sand right now. And, you know, at some point, I'm gonna have to start really trying to balance our needs from the public beach perspective and providing some to the private homeowners. And it's not providing it, they're funding, I mean, they're paying for it, you know, and I think that's another source we need to think about, because, if we do that, it'd be nice to be able to take that money and dedicate it towards, you know, the dredge cost.
Well, and I think just more kudos to you and the whole planning, you know, back a few years ago when the whole harbor was redone. I mean, can you imagine if things weren't pulled back somewhat more, you know, with the velocity zone and the floods? I mean, I can't imagine if they weren't where we would be today, so.
You think about the height of our piles in our old marina, those floats would have been coming up on top of those piles.
Right.
Because we had some real short piles back then.
Yeah,
And
right.
this is the reality of the level of water is just tremendous.
Peter?
So Julie, just to demonstrate that Dana, who's not here today, Dana DaCosta is in Florida, but he is watching actively. And he just sent me a text. He sent several, some of it I've ignored, but.
He's watching that, too.
Tell him to go to the beach.
Thank you, Dana, but this one, I'll just read his quote, and it says, maybe returning the FinCom reserve fund back to $250,000 from $50,000, which it is now, to cover all these departments that want a reserve, might be something to consider. And that way, department heads, if they have a need, an extra 50 grand or whatever to do this or that, they could come to us, through the board, et cetera, and at least would have a pot of money to be able to deal with something. So that's Dana's contribution at 1127.
Thank you, Peter.
Although there are several
Hey,
ones
can
before
I get
that,
a
but
comment
Sure,
regarding
John,
that,
go
if I
ahead.
may? Something like that would, and I'm just gonna give a very recent example. So one of our piles was broken by one of our boaters, our commercial guys, okay? So, I mean, that's just the cost of doing business, right? I mean, these guys in and out, weather, whatever, I mean, so there's no blame there, but it's gotta be fixed. So, I have to hire a barge to come in. We got Robert Auer, who was fortunately had his barge over in Chatham, so I had to wait until they were en route, so they didn't really charge me a significant amount. But by the time you bring a big barge in, get the pile, do the work, right there, that's about an $8,000 project, just to replace a pile. And I have to absorb that within my budget, because I don't have a fund, I have funds for that purpose, but I can't use them until I go to town meeting. And that's difficult, right? So it's not like I
But you
can't.
could make a reserve fund request from to the finance committee.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that.
We have, right now, we have
that's what I'm saying.
$50,000 sitting there. It hasn't been tapped in the last couple of years. We used to use it for things like somebody's boiler would break and, whatever, and you gotta deal with it. It's an unexpected event.
That's great, because I guess I wasn't aware of that.
So you should go to their next
So I'm
meeting.
gonna go to you, I'm gonna send you the receipts.
Well, you have to fill out the forms,
Yeah.
right, and go through the process, but it's available, and you should, folks should
Absolutely.
be using it.
Thank you, I wasn't aware of that.
Otherwise, you gotta try and absorb it in your budget, and then,
And that's what we're doing right now.
Michael?
Okay, thank you.
Well, and to the point, Peter, thank you for saying hasn't been tapped in the last couple of years. I think that should be something from administration to all department heads, that it exists.
Yeah.
So that we can actually use it if we have to.
we have no need for it. I mean, we'd like it to be used.
Right.
And it doesn't roll from one year to the next. I mean, it's just,
Now we're down to 42,000?
Here we go.
Yeah.
well, assuming we approve it. I mean, that's,
Did you have more?
I'm good. Anybody else have any? Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
John, thank you for the job you do. You know what I really like from your department is your activity sheets. Gives you, everybody a gauge of what your department is doing, and to compare it to past times. I think every department should do that. 2 questions.
Sure.
First thing is, when the Allen Harbor Jetty is repaired, will that close off a source of sand for you? Or does your permit, like if you look off of Herring River to the left, a long shoal, does your permit allow you to mine sand from any of those places?
Our permit allows us to dredge within the footprint of our channels. It's considered maintenance dredging, not new dredging. So it's just to maintain our permitted channel. So I could go into Herring River and dredge up to what the permitted depth is. So we're allowed to go to 6 feet, which is the depth for Herring River, -1. So I can go to -7 and dredge. But I can't just go in there and dredge it to 12 feet just to get sand to put on public beaches.
So if Allen Harbor Jetty is repaired, does that reduce the amount of dredge material you'll have available?
I mean, that's why that would be one of the reasons why we would be doing that, or at least that's the case that I brought before the Board of Selectmen to say, we've done assessment, an engineering assessment of the west jetty of Allen Harbor. It's porous in nature. Obviously, that's why we have to dredge every year. Is it to the point where it's gonna fall in the water? No. But, in the future, could it? It could. So we need to make that call, are we comfortable where it's at and it's providing us a source of sand to be dredged and put on our public beaches, or should we shore it up and then reduce the frequency of dredging Allen Harbor? It won't totally, we'll still have to dredge it, but we may not have to dredge it every year.
And you won't have as much dredge material for other?
Correct.
Okay. Just a second, it's not a question, it's an observation. As a taxpayer, I had a meeting with John. What caused me to call on John is a friend of mine has a slip at Saquatucket, lives in Harwich. The adjacent boat has a slip. Resident of Chatham, pay the same amount. Now, I happen to have a mooring in Chatham. I get charged a taxpayer or non-resident fee, because I don't live there. I did a little survey of Cape Cod towns. 8 of the 11 towns charge more for non-taxpayers. And it's been vetted by KP Law, because the logic of it, we call police and fire, in the case of Saquatucket, that Chatham resident is not paying for that. So the point is, and when I brought this up to John, they were well in their billing season for this year, but I would hope that for next year, the Harbor Master Department is getting the information on who are non-taxpayers, so that he can bring to the board what, some revenue increases for non-taxpayers, because as John has said, we've got about $10 or $12 million of upcoming capital projects between Allen Harbor, the bulkhead, and whatever else. So, I'd like to, the reason I bring it up is I'd like to keep it on the select board and administration's, keep it on their mind for once John is over with the busy season, to start to get that information together. Just an observation. Thanks.
Michael?
I would just say that, thank the taxpayer for bringing that forward, and if any one of the board members wants to bring that to the chair for an agenda item, it would be great to hear from John, but at this point, that is not on our radar and not been requested to bring forward. So I think that would start with the harbor master, and it would start with the waterways committee, and/or a board member bringing forward that topic if they want to discuss it.
Bob?
Clarification and a question for John. Clarification is, if I understood a comment by the town administrator a bit ago, we're already contemplating use of those reserves in the sources for this year, the 2 reserves that John mentions?
Correct. Under the revenue section of the sources and uses, interfund transfers. And I think there was a breakout at a previous board meeting, so I can share that with everybody. The 2 funds that the harbor master referenced, funds from that are contemplated in the interfund transfers already.
So if in fact, the desire of folks was to maintain those reserves, as John mentioned, that would be a change to the budget. That would reduce the sources.
Just for clarification, I think we're mixing 2 things up. We're talking about old articles versus his 2 waterway user fee funds, correct?
Correct. When I say receipts reserved, it's the 2 funds that the harbor master spoke of, not any other articles or other funds.
Okay.
And then when you see, and thank you, Selectman McCaskill.
Yeah, because that's where it
when you
came
see the
across.
table
Sorry.
that will appear under Article 4, we have that broken out. We would show those dollar amounts in that table, coming from the receipts reserves accounts.
So not the 2 articles that John thinks of as reserves.
I believe the harbor master is referring to receipts reserves funds, separate from article balances.
And I know what you're saying. When I talked about the 2 articles, I made reference that I would not like to use those because it provides me some reserve funds should something happen. I probably used the wrong word. The 2 receipts reserve funds, Fund 1621 and 1626. One, my mooring fees go into 1621, and 1626, my waterway user fees go into that account. And those are set up per general law that allows us to utilize those funds with town meeting approval for the maintenance of our waterways.
So the plan is to continue those old article balances sitting as they are, just to make sure that I understand.
I defer to the board, because there's been no vote or direction yet on that.
At this
Because
point,
you meant- I think I
there
thought
is
that was what-
nothing on the table to use those.
Okay.
So we have not made any decision today. We're just hearing John's recommendation of what he'd like to do.
I thought that was your original question.
It was. He sold me on keeping it.
Then the question for John, it sounded like when you gave us the final numbers on the dredging rate, that the total came out less than what's in the budget. Is your budget based on the $28 that you were originally working with?
Right, that's what I initially, and just 3 days ago, we got the approval from Assembly of Delegates that showed it went from 28.10 to the 26.50.
26 and
So
change.
what's in there is higher than,
So there may be a reduction in cost in a later draft coming through.
But as he said, things come up during the dredging process that you might need a little bit of margin for.
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is, you know, in the budget that I submitted and that is reflected, that budget line item is,
407, has 407,000.
let me see here. Oh, that's the bill. Is $407,000. With this new rate, it would actually go to 371,000.
So there
And-
may be a question as to whether to leave it alone or not.
I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
I would certainly. Anyway. Any other questions?
We're good.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Okay, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna,
So, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, it is 11:36 by Apple time, 11:38 by Harwich Channel time. Regardless, your agenda says you have a break at noon. However, I will also tell you that your lunch is served. So however you'd like to proceed, the Finance Director will be presenting the Treasurer Collector budget when you come back from lunch break.
I think we need lunch.
So do you want to come back at 12:15 maybe? Or do you want to stick with 12:30? I don't know.
I would defer to the public bodies to say that the meeting notice made reference to a break from 12 to 12:30.
Okay, 12:30.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we might as well break.
Oh, absolutely.
Go through that.
Give our Eagle Scouts a little break, too.
So when do we
Well,
reconvene?
because eyeballs are
12:30.
looking at 12:30.